Welcome to the Synthesize session of magical academic note taking. I must be honest with you and admit that this is my favorite one. The goal of this lesson is to learn the art of synthesizing, which we can also call writing before you write. So that's what synthesizing does, is it allows you to actually get a real head start on your final writing through the act of synthesis, which is what we are going to review today. But first things first, before we do that, I thought it would be important for us to take a quick look at what we've done so far, just to catch up and make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of our process. So I'm in the sidebar. I'm just going to quickly open up the course roadmap and quickly lead you through this so that we are up to date. So we had the introduction, and in the introduction, we talked about what the problems were and what the solutions were in the current academic writing realm with what you can do with Rome and how Rome can provide those solutions to those problems. And then in the second lesson, we talked about academic writing, and we talked about how the process is truly unique and different from any other kind of writing in the fact that it's actually not linear. And so we discussed the four sessions of collect, curate, synthesize, and create, and how those needed to be done separately with deep work and flow so as to manage your task shifting and attention. In the next set of four lessons, we talk about the academic scaffolding. Sonka Arens says that in order to think, you need a scaffolding to hold your thinking, and that is what the Smart Notes process is. But I added a few additional things that I thought would help from an academic perspective. So the initial lesson of the academic scaffolding was Rome setup, and that's where we got together and talked about all the added on tools that you would need, the CSS, the JavaScript, the smart blocks, and made them all available to you via the magical note taking graph. In the next lesson we talked about the management process, how each of you should either use the ones I presented or develop your own processes for managing your work on a day-to-day basis within Rome. So a daily open, a daily close, and a weekly scheduling process, and some sort of task management process is best to have in place before we begin. It will continue to refine as you continue to use Rome research, but you need to be thinking about it from the very beginning. The next lesson was the outlining framework, where we set up the very basic framework for what we're going to be doing with outlines. That's going to be explored a lot more during the synthesize session when we get to outline synthesizing, which will explain a lot more about what we set up initially on the left-hand side menu. And then we had an introduction to Smart Notes. So we talked about what Smart Notes were, how to write with a pen in hand, and make sure that as you are reading, you are also thinking and getting a real head start on what becomes, in this lesson, the synthesize process. Then we went into the collect session. We had a bonus video on how to build process. I thought that it wasn't quite fair of me to keep telling you that you needed to have processes without actually showing you how a process could be built and providing you with the smart block to guide you through that. And then we looked at the collection process in two lessons, where we looked at how we could get all of the notes that you had collected from various different sources and make sure that they came in through a standardized process into Rome Research for your usage in the next steps. Then we went into curation. And in curation, we talked about organizing and staging your sources to get ready for synthesis. And we also talked about how you can curate your sources themselves. So if you are feeling overwhelmed with the amount of reading that you have, how to choose what to read next, and how to get through your bibliography list without having nervous breakdown. And then we had the four really fun building block sessions where we talked about blocks themselves and how important they are in Rome research, and how everyone talks about how blocks are important, but nobody really makes it clear the magic of blocks. And so that's what I hoped this 4-part series would do. Part one, we talked about how you can view blocks as unique by using the analogy of the address. In part two, we talked about blocks versus pages. What's the difference? Why is one used versus the other? Then we talked about block connections, which is how you can connect your blocks together with both your pages and other blocks based on the value of the content that exists within the block itself. And then we talked about block types, which is how if you actually put some thought into the types of blocks that you have within your Roam research system, it is much easier to move forward with process development for your own personal processes and your own personal academic writing practice. And here we are. We are in the synthesize session. So let's talk about the synthesize session. You might find that as you practice the method of working that I'm going to show you today, you will end up doing some of the work that we do here during the synthesize session more frequently during the smart notes process. That's as you get better at this. And that's okay. If it comes naturally for you to do that, then I would go ahead and follow your instinct and do that. If it doesn't come naturally for you to do that, that's okay too. Every single person is individual because every single person has a different thinking pattern, and there is no one pattern that is better than another. So you just have to focus on your own strengths and your own instincts. So the point of keeping these sessions and the work within each session distinct is, as you know, to keep you from forcing yourself to multitask or do lots of task switching that will take you out of the flow of your current activity. And I think that academic writing encourages that type of task switching, which then leads into procrastination. So we are going to be talking about two separate but related synthesize processes. The first in this lesson will be the notes synthesize process. And then after that, we will talk about the outline synthesize process. So what is source synthesizing? Well, let's take a look at the three elements of it. We have pre-synthesize, synthesize, and post-synthesize. So what you have now is you have a list of sources within your Roam research database that have been marked as source active. That's what happens when you bring them in. Don't let this pile of source active sources build up. You want to have more and more and more in the source complete bucket. Remember, again, none of this is a linear process. So you don't read everything you can read and then stop and move on to the next stage of synthesis. You need to alternate your collect, curate, synthesize, and create processes so that the writing is happening all the time and that you never ever get stuck. So you wouldn't sit down and read every single, for a literature review, for example, you wouldn't sit down and read every single book. And then when you were done reading 50 books, try and go back and remember what you wrote in the first one. Some people actually do that. I think I probably would have done that when I first started. This process helps you make sure that you're interweaving the different sessions so that you are in continual movement towards your output, which is a thesis, dissertation, or academic journal paper. So there is a source path for these sources. They start out outside of Roam research, right? As you are reading, most of these sources are outside of the system, and that's when you're collecting them. They are in an external source, so they have no status whatsoever within Roam research. Then you would bring them into Roam research through the curation process, at which point they get that status of source active. Then what you can do when you're synthesizing is just click on the source active page and see everything that you have left to address. Once you have finished the synthesizing process, synthesization, that's not a word, the synthesizing process, then you will be able to mark them as source complete, which is extremely satisfying. So writing is a physical manifestation of your thinking. So why not just capture your writing all the time and not just when you sit down to write within the traditional academic purview of what writing is? The sooner you synthesize a source after you have read it, when it is fresh in your mind, the more likely you are to make connections and contribute to your writing. So the next step in the writing and synthesizing session is the actual notes synthesizing. Synthesizing is this really, really fun part. I find this the most fun of all of the work that we do. And here's a little secret. If you do this part correctly, often, and efficiently, you are basically writing your thesis without even realizing it. And we're not even into the create session yet. This part is focused exclusively on using the academic smart notes that you have already taken so far, that you have on the page in front of you, to synthesize and create some writing activity. So, like I said, there are 3 steps in the synthesizing process. The first step is pre-synthesis. So, what do you do in pre-synthesis? Well, the first thing you do is you set up your Rome. So, you would be opening the source in this main page. And as soon as we're done with this little lesson piece, I'm going to do that for you. But you also want to have in the right side panel other pages that you think you might need. And for us, and this will get clearer when we get to the outline section, that is the elements of the outline. So when you're this early, you'll probably just start, gosh, can't type. You'll probably just start with having the topics page open. The topics page is just where you have collected a bunch of hashtags together where that represent the kind of research that you're interested in or the kinds of questions that you are pursuing. It's something you will have from the very, very beginning, and you should focus on putting it together. It's like collecting keywords for marketing, right? You need to know right away what it is that you are working for and you are trying to develop content around. Further on, as you get through your outline synthesizing, as you start collecting more notes and you start progressing further and further, you might possibly want to have your Q notes page open here or your Z notes page, and eventually you'll have your outline open here as you get ready very close to finalizing your creation. It will happen much more quickly than you can possibly imagine. So here we are. We're in the you're in your main page with your source open, which we're going to do right now, and you have just your topics on the right hand side. So what you see in front of you is what a source would look like sans the bolding, which we're going to talk about in a second, once you have loaded it in to your Rome research. Um, So, first things first, you're going to want to reacquaint yourself with this source. Because of the collection and curate process before this, the source you are looking at now can only have arrived into your Rome one or two of 2 ways. It can either have been transferred from Zotero, in which case it has this Zotero metadata. This will change with the new Zotero into Rome plugin that was luckily released in time for us to review it during the course. And it can look however you wish it to look. Again, this is your process. That's the first way. Or the other way it could have come in is through Readwise, in which case you will have already have reconciled it with the Zotero imported resource page title with the site key, as you see here. Okay, so as we said, this is what you're going to see when you come in to a source page that has just been imported. You won't see this versioning section here. The reason you see it now is because it makes it easier for me to teach if I teach by going through the versions rather than having to create on the go, because that would take a really long time for all of you. So that for me is just a way for me to establish the order of teaching. So for you, all you care about right now is that this is what it looks like when it comes into your Rome. You'll see we have the page number. You'll see that this is a direct quote. And obviously, I didn't read with a pen in hand very well because there's no comment by me. Although, if you scroll a little bit further down, you can see that all 3 of these notes have comments. So this is obviously not the full notation of this particular source, but in order not to overwhelm you and have it be simple to understand, I kept it just down to 5 sources so you could see how it gets done. So in pre-synthesize, your first step is to reacquaint yourself with the metadata, remind yourself what the topic is about, and then what you want to do is um, read through and bold. So I used to teach Tiago Forte's progressive summarization. But the more I have been working with Rome and recognizing the inherent capabilities of the Rome system, it's a very powerful system. The less relevant I really feel the process of of progressive summarization is. However, I have kept a few elements of that process here as I find they might be useful to some of you, and who am I to keep stuff away from you? For me, the main function of the small amount of progressive summarization that I have kept and that I use is to provide an annotation of the main source for context referral, and that's what I do with the bolding. I want to know that if I don't look at this source for 6 months and I open this source page again, that I can very quickly, through three elements, which is the metadata, which we've already gone through, the bolding, and the executive summary, which we're about to talk about, really quickly reacquaint myself with what that source was about and the kinds of information that I gleaned from that source. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to read through and bold. And what you are looking for here is important keywords. And then when you do find them, you might want to even add them to your topics, concepts, from your thesis or from your ideas, phrases, and then other ideas that just jump out to you that you feel might be important. And this is useful when we get into deeper synthesis. So for me, I have bolded romantic image of the author, which is a huge component, genius, which is a definition of the author, the fact that it has been difficult to view authorship any other way than romantic genius since the mid 19th century. I've highlighted a few terms that I use a lot, which is creative entrepreneur, digital revolution. I've highlighted a few text that is important to the 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 background of my thesis, which is literary gatekeepers. Roland Barthes, who's a major contributor to literary theory around the author. And then you'll see I've highlighted quite a big section here, and that means probably I want to look at that a little bit deeper because it might be expanded into something further. So that's all you really do in your pre-synthesis. It gets much better. But you want to make sure that you have bolded enough that when you come back, you can have a quick glance and know exactly what it is that you are looking at. The last thing you do when you are pre-synthesizing is you would complete your executive summary. So your executive summary, the intent of this, it's kind of like a paper abstract, but unlike abstracts which are written for other people, this executive summary is written for you. So you don't need to do an executive summary that tells you exactly what the paper is and exactly what the paper stands for and everything that we tried to do in the curate session. What you're really trying to do here is tell yourself at some point in the future exactly what this paper is about and why it was important to you. So write it for you, write it for future you. Don't write it for anyone else or try and make it fancy or important. You're not going to use this except for your own purposes. So I have written my executive summary in here. This paper examines the historical association of the author with the characterization of genius. This article is a chapter in a book on book history, which you'll see is a tag that I also have over here in my topics. The article disputes the romantic ideal of the author as a solitary genius and provides examples of how historically this was in practice incorrect. Authorship has always been a collaborative endeavor. And since the title of my thesis is collaborative authorship, this is a very important paper to me. So that's it for pre-synthesis. Let's move on to the really fun part.